Hi guys, it's me again. Just come back to do another reading for you, and I'm going to be doing it from this book, which is Doing a Successful Research Project, and it's by Martin Davis and Nathan Hughes. And so I did read a chapter of this on one of my previous videos. So this is chapter 2, and it's called Let's Make a Start. Quite scary. So it says that to complete a successful research project, you must prepare yourself, metaphorically speaking, to practice the art of juggling with several balls in the air at the same time, which is very true when you're doing your dissertation especially. The art of achieving this is to keep clearly in your mind, or preferably on paper, the full sequence of events you will be responsible for. As we suggested at the end of chapter 1, the mantras of asking a good question and achieving specificity of focus are the magic keys that will make it all possible. So the next part is choosing a topic and turning it into a question. So one of the reasons why doing a project is so exciting is because the exercise is personal to you. It is very different from being given an essay title or an exam question designed to test your knowledge in a predetermined area. Even if your course tutor suggests an acceptable topic, there will be plenty of scope for you to introduce your own ideas and stamp your identity on it. To some, it can seem almost like a personal voyage of exploration. It certainly did for me. You may well have been thinking about a suitable research field during earlier stages of your course, and while you have been learning about research methods. But it is wise not to close down any options until you are ready to begin. Commonly, students are inspired by their experience of a particular taught unit or an admired lecturer, or by a new interest that has been stimulated by the degree programme. For me, it was very much my work experience and what I'd experienced with the issues, particularly for older people that I was supporting, which is a real sort of passion of mine. So, what can you do if you can't think of a topic that appeals to you? It's highly unlikely, really, because there's going to be something, isn't there, that interests you. If you can't think of a topic that appeals to you, talk it over with your lecturer. Share your anxieties with fellow students or friends. Browse through your textbooks and lecture notes. Find out what previous year students have done and see if one of their titles gives you an idea. Approach the problem logically by thinking about the subject matter of your degree programme, an interesting course unit, an attractive field within that unit, a topic that interests you. So you may be trying to be too clever, aiming to come up with a topic unique in the history of the universe, something that will have people swooning with admiration at your originality and intellectual precociousness. Don't do it. It's safer and likely to lead to a better mark to settle on an ordinary, middle-of-the-road topic that would lend itself to a nicely organised process of project management. That's the clever way of proceeding. And I've often noticed that the top of the class students tend to recognise this fact only too well. You can always let your cleverness shine through during the stages of design, analysis and write-ups. Don't make things more difficult for yourself than they need to be. It's hard enough as it is. Just going to have some coffee. What to do if you have a string of possible topics, each of which seems tempting? It is a common problem to have a string of possible topics, each of which seems tempting, but your own motivation and the practicality of your choice should be the determining factor. In supervision class, in weeks 1 and 2, when sat in a circle with students and inviting them to discuss their topic ideas, supervisor might inwardly groan when one of them insists on spelling out 5 or 6 possibilities. There is no quick solution to this, and students tend to resist it if the lecturer tries to decide for them. Although we talk about it in class, time constraints and the interests of other students press upon us, and come and see me afterwards is all we can say. Together we then try to assess which topic will sustain the student's interest the most, motivation, and which one will present the fewest problems, practicalities. So how do you move from a topic to a question? Moving from a topic to a question is a crucial stage in the development of your research mindedness, and it marks the beginning of the logical process of thought that enables you to emerge at the end with presentable findings. The process has 2 stages. The first is straightforward. You just turn your topic into a question format. We saw examples of this in chapter 1. It's the next stage that is trickiest. So it says here, how do you move from your first idea of a question to a feasible research question? You need to get moving from your first idea of a question to a feasible research question. Right. Because it counteracts any tendency towards too broad a focus and sets your agenda within manageable limits. The best way of succeeding is to subject your proposed research question to a rigorous process of interrogation. A good supervisor will do it for you, but with the following checklist, you can perfectly well do it yourself. So this is the checklist. It says, is your question too general for a small time limited study? Is it more suitable for a doctoral thesis or even a book? Have you achieved specificity, I can't say that word, I'm sorry, of focus, specificity of focus? Is it possible that your question is more complex than it looks? If you are intending to carry out an evaluation or gauge the effectiveness of something, is that a realistic goal? Is it a question that lends itself to a predetermined structure, even perhaps enabling you to use an existing research instrument or measuring scale? Or does it require exploratory, reflective analysis? Does the question fall within the agenda of the course? Have you thought about the likely cost to you? Might there be any problems of access to your research population? Will your project need the agreement of an ethics or governance committee? If so, is it likely that they will approve your choice? Do you need permission to use an intended research instrument? So here it says, how specific does the specificity of focus need to be? Please tell me if I'm saying that word wrong. One of the things that a career researcher will tell you is that the more you research a subject, the more intrigued you will become by specific aspects of it. And this leads you naturally to ask a highly focused question. But at the beginning stage, the degree of specificity may vary from the discipline to discipline, from methodology to methodology, and from lecturer to lecturer. The focus is often tightest in those subjects that are close to the natural sciences, psychology, geography, environmental science, and subjects allied to medicine. For example, it is less so in sociology, social administration and related fields. But no matter what the subject, we recommend the value of adopting the principle of specificity of focus for 2 reasons. Number 1, most undergraduate or master's level student projects have to be completed within a short time frame or alongside other course units. It is simply not possible for a student researcher to handle diffuse material within broadly defined boundaries in a way that leads to high quality results. Number 2, however bright you are, however good you have become at essay writing, and whatever teaching you have received in research methods, you still need to learn the art and craft of real-world research, step by step. By achieving specificity of focus, you will be able to practice and demonstrate your abilities at every stage of the project without losing sight of your goal. So here it talks about practicalities. Let's assume you have jumped the first hurdle and have a question that feels doable and has been approved by your supervisor. The next step is to work out how best to find an answer to your question. First, you must take account of some of the practical realities that will determine how you might proceed. The value of your project for your degree and career. The most important thing to bear in mind is that your completed project report will contribute significantly to your degree or diploma grade. It will tend to get mentioned in academic references that are written about you and may well be discussed by prospective employers when they interview you for a job. A student's research-based dissertation is widely recognised as something special in the educational process, and 3 things follow from that. Number 1, you would be wise to follow the methodological ethos of your course. Don't be too stubborn or bloody-minded about doing your own thing. If it is in blatant conflict with what your course tutor recommends. Number 2, do the very best you can, and that means giving the task your full concentration throughout the period of time that is allowed. Number 3, recognise that the research project task in itself may be relevant to your future career. People know you can write essays. All students can, more or less. But your dissertation will give you the opportunity to learn and demonstrate skills in project planning, negotiation, interviewing strangers, data analysis, perhaps including statistical manipulation, software usage, including spreadsheets and databases, and the presentation of numerical findings or analytical interpretations within a carefully constructed report. Your own preference. subject to whatever guidance you are given by course tutors. Your own feelings for a preferred methodology may come into play. You should be wary, however, of allowing this to override your professional and academic judgment in determining the right methodology to use in order to get an appropriate answer to your research question. Time constraints, which was my biggest downfall. You must be realistic about the time constraints. You would be well advised, for example, not to plan to use a lengthy interview schedule with 500 school children, even if you have ease of access because you are working in a classroom. 100 5-minute structured interviews or 12 45-minute reflection conversations will be more realistic, and provided they have been well designed, they will give you more than enough material to demonstrate your skills as a research analyst. For ease of access, you could plan to base your study on encounters with students on campus, or with members of the public in a city centre, or in an airport lounge where people are killing time and are often only too pleased to talk to someone. A common shock for students doing a qualitative research study is a discovery that having collected, let us say, 12 70-minute recordings of one-to-one interviews, the time needed to listen to them will be 14 hours non-stop, while the time needed to transcribe and subject them to detailed analysis will extend to many hundreds of hours. It is essential that you think about this beforehand, rather than halfway through your project when submission deadlines are looming. Resource issues. The resource issues may simply be a matter of money. For example, imagine you have committed yourself to carry out a study in 10 garden centres or 6 tourist resorts. You've got to get there, perhaps on a number of occasions, and you will need to budget for it. Logistics can be problematic. For example, one of our students aimed to interview shoppers using the all-night supermarket. She wanted to find out why they were there in the middle of the night, but only after she'd set about the business of data collection did she realise that she hadn't the means of getting there at 2 o'clock in the morning because of her reliance on friends' transport and concerns about her personal safety. So she had to settle for doing the study between 11 o'clock and midnight, which was fine as a research exercise in its own right, but not what she had originally hoped to achieve, and almost certainly meaning she was interviewing a different kind of sample. Pitch it at a level appropriate to your expertise. If this is the first time you have done a research project, don't be overly ambitious. Keep your objectives modest and your focus tight, and you won't go far wrong. Many beginning researchers try to cover too much ground in too short a time, and if you're guilty of that, your project report will not be as good as you would like it to be. When you've given some thought to these practical matters, you may find you want to make changes to your original idea, even to the question you thought you had settled on. This is not a sign of half-baked thinking or bad planning on your part. On the contrary, it shows that you are learning that the process of doing research is not linear, but dynamic. It evolves, and in the course of its development, you may well have ideas that take you up blind alleys from which you will have to retreat. The greatest intellectual assets for the researcher in any discipline are flexibility, an open mind, and curiosity. And this is so just as much as the pre-planning stage as it is later on. Selecting your methodology. Having identified a research question, you face a critical decision. Once you have decided which methodological route to go down and have embarked on the process of preparing for data collection, your course will be set. It is important for you to feel confident that you have made the right choice. There are two principal options open to you. Number one, you can choose quantitative research methods using the traditions of science. And number two, you can opt for qualitative research, employing a more reflective or exploratory approach. The distinction between the two is not as clear-cut as it is sometimes assumed, and indeed a third option is open to you, a mixed methods approach that combines aspects of quantitative and qualitative research. Career researchers may make use of both methods at different times, or even at the same time, depending on the nature of the question they are seeking to answer. In large-scale projects, investigators may use a circular sequence in which exploration is followed by measurement, which is in turn followed by qualitatively an analytical phase in order to throw more light on aspects of scientific findings. It will, however, become clear in parts 2 and 3 that there are marked differences between the two methods, both in the objectives they pursue and in the sequential pattern of research activity they require, and the timescale relative to the different elements that are involved. Both methods present challenges to the researcher. To put it rather simplistically, qualitative research requires imagination, patience, and discipline at the planning and design stages. Data collection may present technical problems and requires tenacity, but is often straightforward. The tasks of data analysis and write-ups are largely, although not entirely, determined by the way the project was set up. Qualitative research requires careful thought at the outset. It demands mental agility, flexibility, and alertness during data collection. It calls for advanced skills in data management and text-driven creativity during analysis and write-up. This book will provide detailed guidance for both routes. In deciding how to answer your research question, it will be helpful to get clear in your mind which of various research objectives your question seems to be pointing towards. Will your project be aiming to describe, monitor, or investigate? Both qualitative and quantitative research can deliver this, but they will produce different kinds of descriptions. Explore. It depends on the nature of the exploration, but both qualitative and quantitative research can be used. Quantitative methods may use a survey of some kind, while qualitative methods often rely on interviews or observations. Again, the nature of the exploratory material produced is significantly different in each case. Interpret. Qualitative research is especially strong in this area, although advanced methods of survey analysis can be effective in a rather different way. Does it look behind the surface? Much qualitative research aims to do just that, to reflect on the feelings and experiences relative to the research question, to explore the nature of the relationship between person and situation, and to take account of the effect of the research analyst's own background and role. Does it want to evaluate? Independent, detached, replicable evaluation as distinct from user or customer opinion, which can be based on either methodology, is almost wholly dependent on quantitative research, generally using an experimental model. Evaluation of a kind that allows for variations of perspective between the different parties involved, for example, doctors and patients, management and workers, may make some use of qualitative methods. Does it explain? Both methodologies can be used to deliver explanations and found in the intellectual agility of the researcher. No method is more than a tool requiring the skill of an expert craftsperson if it is to lead to an explanatory conclusion. Judgments about the legitimacy of the explanatory focus may in either case be subject to dispute unless the conclusion is supported by corroborating evidence from a different perspective or source. Does it want to prove? Proof, as traditionally understood, is essentially a scientific concept that depends on findings being tested to breaking point. Examples can be found in psychology, economics, marketing and advertising, but they are noticeably rare in mainstream social science or social policy, much to the chagrin of politicians and managers. The delivery of proof tends to rely on experiments or quasi-experiments, but it can also draw on simple observation or a survey. The best example of this lies in the refutation of the assertion that all swans are white, that comes with the sighting of a single black swan. It is clear, then, that qualitative and quantitative methods enable researchers to address very different research aims. Each has its strengths and its limitations. Your choice of methods should be guided by an appreciation of these strengths and weaknesses, and parts 2 and 3 are designed to support this. However, your choice of methods might also be guided by your philosophical views on the world. In other words, your approach to your research may be determined by your perspective on and assumptions about the social world, how it is organised, and how it can be understood. This is typically expressed in terms of the ontology and epistemology associated with different types of methods. In short, ontology refers to how you view and perceive the social world, its rules and its structures, and epistemology relates to how you know, what constitutes knowledge, and how knowledge can be developed. While this philosophical research terminology is not essential understanding for a student research project, reflecting on these concepts can help you to question your approach. The concepts and their value will make more sense through two examples: positivism and interpretivism. Positivism is an approach to social science. Develops from the traditions of the natural sciences. It is based on an ontological assumption that the world is governed by a series of rules and laws, and an associated epistemological position that these rules can be tested and understood through experiments. Such a position therefore favours quantitative methods, as these are seen to be objective and the results generalisable. In contrast, interpretivism, or anti-positivism, as it is sometimes called, is based on an ontological assumption that there is no objective reality, no singular way of understanding the world. Instead, reality is seen to be subjective, with people having varied experiences and perspectives, and thus interpretations of the social world. In order to understand the social world, we therefore need to understand and explain these varying experiences and perspectives. It follows then that we should adopt qualitative methods so as to understand the rich and complex lives and opinions of the people we are researching. It is a simplification to present such a dichotomy of positions centred on qualitative and quantitative methods. Instead, it is better to conceive of a continuum of different views and approaches. However, understanding positivism and interpretivism as distinct polar opposites of this continuum will enable you to reflect on and perhaps question your own inherent preferences, or dare we say, biases. Throughout this book we argue that the specific research aims should guide the choice of approach, but it is undeniable that, in many instances, a researcher's ontology and epistemology predetermines the choice of research objectives and methods. 14 ways of doing research. What, then, are the various research techniques available to you? How do they relate to the question you have identified? We begin with the models that are most frequently employed in student research, which lead to the production of largely descriptive or exploratory reports. Then come the experimental methods, and finally a small group that use mixed methods. Remember that the models are not mutually exclusive. none of them can be identified as being superior to any or all of the others. The right choice for you will depend entirely on the nature of your research question, coupled with your personal preferences and the constraints imposed on you by the course. You can interview people using closed questions. Interviewing people using closed questions is probably the method of social research most familiar to lay people. An interviewer approaches you in the pedestrian precinct or calls at your door and asks if you are willing to answer some questions. If you agree, you find that the questions tend to be highly structured, inviting tick box answers that you may or may not feel accurately reflect your view. You may be asked to look at some pictures and answer questions about them. The purpose of this method is often descriptive or exploratory, collecting simple, categorical and numerical data. The researcher may want to know some facts about you and your behaviour, what kind of car you own or would like to own, what TV adverts you can remember for a commercial company, or it may be that you are the subject of an inquiry that will result in the preparation of a student research report similar to the one you hope to produce. Just having a quick drink. You can ask people structured questions by sending them a letter and questionnaire through the mail. With the passage of time, the value of mailed questionnaires has come to be seriously questioned. When research studies were a rarity, it was not impossible to persuade people, particularly professionals in a working context, school teachers, probation officers, car sales personnel, to respond cooperatively to a well-designed questionnaire. Sent through the post, especially if it was accompanied by a stamped, addressed envelope. The former questions would generally be quite structured, and the quality of the design and layout would have a major influence on whether targeted recipients would resist the temptation to bin it. Still today, the key to a successful mailed questionnaire inquiry lies in the quality of the preparation that has gone into it, the extent to which it links with the interests of the recipients, the courtesy of the approach, perhaps including a prior or follow-up phone call and enclosure of a stamped addressed envelope, and the achievement of brevity and tightness of focus. You can use email or the internet to deliver questionnaires and receive replies. There is something tempting about using one's PC as a medium for gathering data from a research sample. You create a structured questionnaire in exactly the same way as you would as if you were preparing an interview or sending a mailed questionnaire to a targeted body of recipients. You then mail it electronically or construct and host it on an online survey tool website. It can include tick button response opportunities and incorporate pictures diagrams or sounds. This was something that I used on, I think it was Microsoft Forms, and it actually generated some of the answers into like graphs and things for me, which was really useful. It says you will need access to the email or web addresses of an appropriate population. I did mine through work, so it was quite good. I could also email and remind people to do it, so that was quite helpful. Or you could access potential respondents through social media sites or relevant internet message boards. With luck, the method can shorten the period of data collection considerably, but outside the framework of a closed organisation, such as a church, workplace or leisure group, to which the researcher belongs, where the level of interest and cooperation may be high, there is likely to be a disappointing response rate. Yeah, like I said, mine was through work and it was all related to our job, so there was quite an interest in filling it out and people were very helpful. But like it says, if that's not the case, you will find it difficult, because I don't know about you, but I very rarely fill out surveys and things online. It says here that you can conduct semi-structured, reflective interviews. In the student context, conducting semi-structured, reflective interviews might involve a sample ranging between 6 and 20. The basic tool will be an interview prompt sheet containing a carefully selected list of topics. The questions should not be of a kind that invite simple yes or no, or similarly closed answers. Your aim is to stimulate reflection and exploration. The approach is often concerned with people's feelings, for example, about being divorced, living under the flight path of a planned airport runway, having a terminal illness, or having spent time in a mental hospital. At its best, the method can lead to significant advances in our theoretical understanding of social reality. More routinely, it is particularly good at enabling the researcher to learn at first hand about people's perspectives on the subject chosen as the project focus. Typically, such interviews take place in person, although where this restricts the range of participants, they might also be carried out over the phone. Indeed, increasingly researchers are making use of software that allows voice calls over the internet, such as Skype, or undertaking interviews using live text-based discussions. While not without the challenges, such methods have the potential to significantly broaden the range of people who can be interviewed. You can conduct group interviews, partly because of the widely publicised use of focus groups by political parties in their attempt to identify trends of thought and feelings among voters. The idea of group interviewing has caught the imagination of students. The ideal number of group members is 6, 7 or 8, depending on the nature of the exercise. The project should aim to obtain data from at least 5 or 6 groups. The researcher needs a topic guide, and the setting should be comfortable and convenient. Care must be taken to ensure that all shades of opinion in the group are heard. The researcher's own views should never become obvious, and the flow of ideas emerging from the group must not be constrained by the researcher's own perspective. The group will be audio recorded. Video recording is typically too intrusive, and the analysis requires contextual interpretation rather than any suspicion of quantitative counting. You can observe people in action. Observation is the classic territory of the anthropologist and the zoologist, but in psychological and social sciences it can take many forms. Participant observation, in which the researcher lives or works with the subjects of study. Ethnographic research is a form of participant observation in which the emphasis is on the recording of details about the object of study in its cultural setting. Covert observation, a form of participant observation in which the researcher's purpose and identity are concealed. Currently, ethical requirements make it difficult to carry out covert observation, but it has been used by investigative journalists from newspapers and television companies to infiltrate organisations and report abuses. I'm sure we've all seen some of those disturbing documentaries. Non-participant observation, in which the researcher remains outside the focus of the study but looks on and records activities, verbal and non-verbal interactions and consequential happenings, just as a work-study analyst does in the factory or office. A video camera can be used. Such methods might also be employed in observing online interactions, such as on internet message boards. Although much observation analysis is qualitative, the researcher can build numerical structures into the data collection process. You can analyse the written word or spoken word. There are a number of different research methods concerned with the analysis of verbal or written material. Historical research is heavily dependent on archival research, but the method can be employed contemporaneously. It tends to require a high level of theoretical understanding, and where that is missing, the results are often disappointing. 3 such methods are content analysis, the study of published or other written materials such as diaries, archives, transcriptions of broadcasts or film scripts, committee minutes, financial records, or newspaper articles. This is the bread and butter territory of the historian, but it can be difficult for the untutored student to match the standards that should be aspired to. Number 2 is thematic analysis, the study of the social meaning of recorded conversations, either naturally conducted or in an encounter with a research interviewer. Number 3 is linguistic analysis or ethnomethodology, the study of how people use words, sentences, pauses, silences, grunts, laughter. The method focuses on the verbal and situational nature of the material rather than its explicit meaning. you can test a hypothesis. One way to begin designing a research project is to consider a hypothesis to be tested. A hypothesis is a statement, an assertion, often indicating a claimed pattern of cause and effect. For example, research might seek to test whether travelling abroad increases the risk of you catching a named disease. Recycling domestic waste saves money. Sub-zero temperatures lead to an increase in car accidents. Alternatively, the assertion can involve making comparisons between two groups or classes. For example, women are more emotionally sensitive than men. 20-year-olds have sex more frequently than 50-year-olds. People who use computers get more headaches than people who don't. The task for the researcher is to find a way of testing the chosen statement. As you will realise if you think about these examples, this may not be as easy and could involve a range of different research methods. You can carry out an experiment by doing a randomised controlled trial or an RCT. Experiments usually begin with a testable hypothesis. For example, following a particular diet for a specified period is effective in achieving weight reduction. In order to see whether the hypothesis is true or false, the experimental researcher artificially does something to one group of subjects, persuades them to follow the diet, and does not do it or does something else to a control group. Randomized controlled trials are often said to represent the gold standard of experimental research. The findings from RCTs have a higher level of validity than those from any other method of comparing the impact of an intervention. With respect to the diet hypothesis, you need to have access to a willing population big enough to give a reasonable chance of obtaining measurable results. You randomly allocate each person into the experimental group, Group E, or control group, Group C. Only those in the E group follow the diet plan. You do not need to control for age, gender, or body shape, provided your sample is big enough. The variations will be randomly reflected in both groups. The E group will be expected to obey your instructions, and after an agreed period of time, their corporate weight loss or gain will be assessed and compared with the comparative weights in the C group. The classic territory for RCTs has been in agriculture, comparing the relative merits of different kinds of fertilizers or animal feed. The pharmaceutical industry, comparing the effects of medicines, and in laboratories, but they are notoriously difficult to operationalize in the real-life social world. For example, if in another experiment you had hypothesized that the provision of a counselling service is likely to benefit redundant employees, you would make the necessary arrangements to have an E and a C group. But if the C group hears about the selective provision of support counselling service, they or their trade union might clamour for equality of provision, thus blowing the experiment out of the water. I found as well, being an undergraduate student, that I relied on other people's RCTs to include in my research. So it's usually a better way of doing it, because as an undergraduate student it's very hard and very difficult. I'm thinking, along the lines of ethically, of carrying out this kind of research. So I just relied on other people's research to sort of prove my point, really. It says here you can devise a quasi-experiment. Randomness makes for a true experiment, but there are other ways of organising two groups of people for comparative purposes. Quasi-experiments use the experimental model as an ideal, but fall short of the standards set by the RCTs because they take into account the practical and ethical problems of experimentation in the real world. They are much commoner in the social sciences than true experiments. Quasi-experiments compare groups that cannot be assumed to be strictly equivalent. Although it is open to researchers to take steps to increase the level of equivalence between the E and C groups. More commonly, they can match pairs by age, gender, experience, or other variables relative to the experiment. They can also take measures pre-test and post-test in both groups to improve the quality of the research by increasing the level of internal validity. In our redundancy counselling project, in order to avoid the risk of resentment and rebellion, a quasi-experiment might locate the E and C groups in different parts of the country, where C people wouldn't hear what was going on in the E group. But you would need to achieve good matches for the people involved, their age, gender and skill level, the type of work from which they'd been made redundant, and the state of the local economy in terms of the availability of alternative employment, none of which would be easy. It says here that you can undertake some secondary analysis of data, which is what I was just talking about that I did from other people's RCTs. It says there are two kinds of secondary analysis. Number one, the first involves gaining access to data that other people have collected, perhaps through one of the data banks available, or through a lecturer or researcher with gathered material already on file. This may be data of any kind across the quantitative-qualitative spectrum, and, when used imaginatively, can produce quite fresh perspectives. Number two, the second is based on the analysis of available statistics, either from government or commercial sources. The clear advantage of these databases is their size. They include a large volume of cases, far more than it is possible from the average research project. There are numerous such data sets available and accessible through your university affiliation, and they cover a wide range of topics. This type of project can be effective particularly when the reanalysis focuses on geographical variations or seeks to trace change over time by combining datasets. But the end result can never be better than the quality of the original data permits. A particularly clever research skill is to conduct quasi-experiments within an existing body of data and without the need for any social intervention. For example, by interrogating the records of criminal courts to identify differences in sentencing patterns, perhaps by comparing urban and rural areas, or identifying the ethnic background or age of defendants. These methods deny you the full experience of project design and contact with the subjects of your study. Educationally, therefore, their value may be seen as being more limited. You can do action research. The idea of action research reached its peak with the community development movement and feminist activism in the second half of the 20th century. Radical campaigners built research elements into their programs with the aim of achieving a fruitful interaction between the accumulation of evidence, usually about poverty, discrimination, or oppression, and the implementation of funded projects. The argument is that once researchers have identified areas of change will be more easily achievable. The model can be a useful one, even though, by definition, it is not value neutral in the way that classical research methods are supposed to be. Problems can arise if the researcher doesn't deliver the results that conform to or confirm the activist's desired policy. You can write a case study. The case study approach offers an attractive way of using a variety of research methods to produce a rounded portrayal of an identified subject. It might be a working environment, a small community, a family, a marriage, or other intimate relationship, an individual with a medical or psychological condition of some specified kind, a youth group, an office environment, or a local political party. You can use a triangulated approach. The metaphor of triangulation is drawn from the world of surveying. In social research, it is based on the idea of using 2 or 3 different methods to explore the same subject. The scheme tends to be popular with students, and it can be used to good effect. However, with limited time at your disposal, it may be preferable to use one method and get it spot on rather than risk delivering second-rate material in 2 or more different methods. So now there's a conclusion to this chapter. In practice, most beginning social researchers will expect you to use some form of interview, questionnaire, observation, or document analysis. You should only venture into complex theoretical territory using, for example, ethnomethodology, if you have been prepared for it through course teaching and reading. Depending on the nature and subject matter of your program, you can build in to your objectives an element of hypothesis testing or an emphasis on exploration, whether reflective, interpretive or descriptive. When you have finished your project, you will have demonstrated your understanding of and your ability to handle efficiently all the various stages of the research process. It is the aim of this book to enable you to do just that. And that's where we'll leave it for today. It's a fantastic book, so thank you for sticking with me, and I really hope to see you again soon. Thank you, my lovelies. Bye bye.